In this video, I'm going to talk about IAS 20 government grants. Hi, I'm the Commerce Specialist. Welcome to my channel where you will find videos covering learning outcomes of various academic qualifications and professional certifications, including life-changing business ideas and hacks. So before we start with IAS 20 government grants, just a humble and gentle request and reminder to you, if you're not yet subscribed to my channel, please subscribe. So let's jump into IAS 20 government grants. First of all, we need to understand what is a grant. A grant is an assistance by the government to an entity in the form of transfer of resources in return for past or future compliance with certain conditions relating to their operating activities. Before we get into the details of grants, we need to understand what are not covered under IAS 20. There are certain exceptions. Number one, if the grant cannot be measured in terms of money, that is not covered under IAS 20 government grants. Number two, if the grant cannot be distinguished from the routine operating activities of the business. For example, we are a business, we keep borrowing money and we borrowed from a government entity. And the loan is taken on an arm's length transaction, means the terms and conditions have been normal at anybody else would get the loan on the same terms and condition what we got. So that's normal. It's not an assistance, it's not a grant. Okay, so there are two exceptions. If the grant cannot be quantified in terms of money, and if the grant or assistance cannot be distinguished from the routine operating or trading activities of the business, then it's not covered under IAS 20 government grants. So the very first thing we need to understand is when an entity, a company, should recognize a government grant. A grant is only recognized when there is a reasonable assurance that the condition relating to receiving the grant would be complied with and the grant would actually be received. So when we talk about condition relating, now there can be many conditions. Let's talk about a specific example. What if we are an educational institution and we've been providing education especially for the underprivileged class, and the government has seen our efforts in the past years, and now they're giving us a new building as a grant. Now the condition relating to the building is that this building should be used only for educational activities. Education should be provided to the underprivileged or the poor students, and there could be many other conditions which we have to comply with. So if the entity is determined and able to comply with all these terms and conditions relating to the grant, yes, the grant can be recognized. The other condition is whether the grant will actually be received. Now here there are many probabilities and assumptions which a company needs to understand before deciding whether the grant should be recognized. For example, though on a lighter note, if you have good rapport with the government, some government officers, like in English we call it like a jack, in Hindi and Urdu we call it a jugaad, and in Arabic we call it wasta, which means if you have some connections inside and for sure you will be getting it, so the second condition is met. Yes, the grant will be received. And the first condition is whether you will be complying with the terms and conditions of the grant. If the organization is determined, if the management is determined to comply with and adhere with, yes, grant can be recognized. The example I gave you was on a lighter note, but otherwise understanding the probability of grant, whether it will be received or not, so you have to look at the past traditions, whether the government has given such grants to other entities. Like other entities, will we be able to comply with the terms and conditions? If yes, the grant can be recognized. There is another term used in IAS 20 as forgivable loans. What are forgivable loans? Under forgivable loans, the lender agrees to waive the repayment of the loan if certain prescribed conditions are met. The grants which an entity may receive, there are two types of grants. Grants relating to income, grants relating to assets. When we are talking about grants relating to income, they are shown in the profit and loss account either separately as a grant received, as other income, or the grant could be deducted from the related expenses. For example, we are an entity and we are building, let's say, an asset, a school, a building, okay, and we have received some grant in order to construct the building. So obviously in constructing a building there will be a lot of expenses or cost involved, so whatever grant we have received we can just subtract it from our actual expenses. Now when we're talking about grant relating to assets, there are some primary conditions. When we say assets, like for example the government is either giving us cash to purchase assets or they're giving us in kind. The grant is in kind, like maybe they're giving us land to build, construct a building on it, or a building which is already owned by the government, they're giving us as a grant so that we can open up a hospital, obviously for welfare purposes, or a school for the poor children. If you're talking about the primary condition relating to assets, entity should either purchase or construct the non-current assets. I know I've worked for an educational institution where they were given land free of cost, but the term and condition was only a school will be built on this land, nothing else. Because that entity which I worked for, they were already in education business for a long time. The government, they had a good rapport with the government, so the government, in recognition of their past services, gave them a land free of cost in a prime location, but the attached condition was that only a school will be built upon this land, nothing else. If the grant is given in terms of cash, that means this cash would be utilized only to purchase a building or to buy land for specified purposes, which is already discussed and agreed with the lender, which is the government. There are additional conditions relating to the grant relating to assets, and these are relating to restricting the type, location and period. Now whether we talk about any of these three, that restricting the type, location or period, this applies during which they are to be acquired or held. Means the land is to be purchased, or if it's a building, you are holding the building for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. What is the restriction? Number one, the type. Means you can only make a school, not a hospital, or a hospital, not a school. Maybe it is for an NGO, a non-government organization. Maybe it is for running an ambulance service. So this is restricting the type. Now the grant is received, money is received for what purposes? Many 4x4s are received for what purposes? Maybe for ambulances. Then says location. Okay, you've been given a grant relating to asset, which is, let's say, some money, but you are supposed to open a school only in an underprivileged area, not in the cosmopolitan cities, but in remote areas probably. The third one is the period. Sometime the government will give you grant in form of a building and you're supposed to operate a school in that building for, let's say, the period is specified for another 20 years, for 15 years. After that, based upon compliance of terms and condition, the period may be extended or the building has to be returned back to the government. So when we're talking about IAS 20 government grants, okay, if a grant is received, we know when we should be recognizing a grant, okay, how grants relating to income and assets are recorded and what are their specific terms and conditions relating to them. Now we're talking about presenting. So when we talk about presentation, either the grant can be recorded as a deferred income, means when the money is received, you debit cash and credit deferred income. And as I said, there is a number of period involved. So if the grant is received for 10 years, okay, you record debit cash and credit deferred income, and every year you can divide it by 10 and a portion can be released to profit and loss. So how it happens? After 1 year, you will be debiting deferred income, okay, and you crediting profit and loss, let's say with 10,000, if 100,000 were received for 10 years. The second presentation is either you record it as a deferred income or deduct the grant in calculating the carrying value of the asset. In addition to all this, there is also a particular specific condition for grants relating to non-depreciating assets. So grant relating to non-depreciated asset is, what we need to understand is, if certain conditions are met, grant can be recognized as income over the period in which cost of meeting the obligation is measured. For example, an example for this would be, let's say, you have received a land as a grant and you got to build school on it. So the grant is recognized as an income over the useful life of the building. For example, building's life is 20 years and the building is worth, the cash which you have received is 20 million. So 20 million divided by 20, you will get, 1 million per year, which will be recorded as an income over the period of the useful life of the building. Then what we need to understand is repayment of grants. Sometime you do receive a grant, but you're supposed to pay it back over a certain period. What happens then is, if it is payable, it is accounted for a change in accounting estimate as per IAS 8. So if the grant is repayable, it should be considered and accounted for under IAS 8 accounting estimates. If the grant is relating to income, it is first applied to any unamortized deferred credit, and then if anything is left, and then in profit and loss. So ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have understood IAS 20 government grants. If you have any specific questions relating to IAS 20 government grants, please leave a comment. I will respond to that. I repeat, if you are not yet subscribed, please subscribe my channel. Press the bell notification button so that you get my videos on a timely basis. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and share this video with all your dear and near ones. Thank you so very much for your precious time. Take care of yourself. Love you all.